Hello, everyone. I am Robert Hernandez, digital journalism professor at USC Annenberg and editor at large for Immersive Shooter. And today we're doing an experiment to learn about photogrammetry with some pretty amazing people, focusing on Alexey, who I'll introduce in a little bit. You'll see with us in the Hangout are some of the pioneers for immersive journalism coming from Germany, DC, London, New York, all over, and Colombia, Bogota, Colombia, all over the world, coming together to learn more about photogrammetry, the ability to make 3D models out of images. And leading the discussion for that will be Alexey Furman, based out of the Ukraine. Alexey, what time is it over there?
It's 7 p.m.
7 p.m. Great. So it's 9 a.m. here in LA. Thank you for taking the time. Why don't you introduce yourself and talk about the work that you're working on, the project, the grant that you got from Journalism 360, and then lead us into a conversation about photogrammetry. I'll ask questions. The audience here, the amazingly talented audience here, will also ask questions. Some of them have done photogrammetry and videogrammetry, and so we'll have some questions to keep this conversation going. So Alexey, take it away.
Thank you. So the first thing I would like to say is that a lot of the work that we're doing now in Ukraine would be impossible without the J360 Challenge Grant. So I'm very thankful to Laura who put it all together and made our work possible. So together with a friend of mine, Sergey Polozhako, we founded a 360 VR production company called New Cave Media. 360 video, we shot an interactive application in the Arctic in 2016, and we are the first to use 360 video in Ukraine. And as we were showing, and we pretty much spent the whole 2017 to Ukraine and showing the work that we're doing during big media events, and we sort of noticed, and we knew about volumetric capture, but some as we saw among our audience was that when people were watching 360 video in VR goggles, they tried to walk. That told us a lot. What it told us is that people were believing what they were seeing, but they wanted something, wanted to explore the space around them. And we started thinking about doing volumetric capture, and we knew about photogrammetry. We got our first lessons in photogrammetry from a game development company based in Poland. They're called the Farm 51, ones that did a project called Chernobyl VR that is, I think, available for Oculus Rift and Samsung Gear VR. Put them to Chernobyl and learn photogrammetry from them. And I think it's an interesting fact, the intersection of sort of game developers meeting journalists and what can happen. Operation is something to think about all the way through. And the project that we proposed to J360 Challenge Grant is of a very big part of downtown Kyiv, where police forces killed over 47 protesters during the Euromaidan 2014 revolution. So photogrammetry, it's a great tool.
And let's also define some of those terms: volumetric, photogrammetry, videogrammetry, using scanners. Like, what are the different categories? Are they all interchangeable? Or do they mean different things?
So photogrammetry is a tool that allows you to create 3D models from still images. You take a lot of still photographs of a given object or room or an outside space, and then you put it into special processing software, and it creates a 3D model for you. Pitfalls to this capture. One of the pitfalls and why videogrammetry is so meaningful is because in photogrammetry, it's almost impossible to capture, well, it is impossible to capture a moving human beings are, you know, all sort of journalism is about. So videogrammetry, a totally different a process that is far harder than photogrammetry, and it allows capturing a human being talking, and then you're in VR, you're able to walk around this person and walk around the person and explore both the space and see the person talking. Which
And both of them are volumetric.
Yeah.
Volumetric means what I also use the term room scale. Is that what that is?
Yeah. So photogrammetry is volumetric capture because you are able to recreate, let's say, a room which is going to be static. You are able to walk around this room and explore it for yourself and kneel, jump. So it's a totally volumetric way of capturing reality. Photogrammetry. So I think when storytellers explore photogrammetry for themselves, it kind of seems like a very great and magical tool. You know, it's something really to dream about without knowing how to create 3D models from scratch. Take your digital camera or a drone that you already have at your disposal, move an existing object from reality to virtual reality, and really recreate it. But it is sort of magical, and it's great, the process. I'll go through photogrammetry capture, I think, a little later. It is a magical process, but as any tool, it has its pros and cons. So one of the things that I mostly like about photogrammetry, I would say, is that it produces documentary result. We're able to scan something in real life, have the shape and the texture of a real world object. But the thing is, there are a lot of photogrammetry. It really works. It really works great if you can control the space. If you can control the space where you capture it. We are recreating a big chunk of a street, and it's really difficult because there are a lot of sort of elements that can cause problems. One of them, the easiest, is the weather. So to do a successful photogrammetry capture, you need cloudy weather. The software that puts the images together, it's difficult for it if the light changes, and there are very light and very dark parts of the object. So the object has to be evenly lit. So that is something that you can do in a studio with let's say, a monument that you can, you know, bring out of a studio. But if you're capturing something outside, the weather is really something that you cannot influence. Another thing is that if you're capturing something in a city, this stuff can be moved. That's something that we faced in our project. This is a downtown street that we're capturing, and the objects get moved constantly. Problem, because if a part of the street was captured today and the other part will be captured tomorrow, some objects, I'm deadly sure, would be moved, and then the software just goes nuts, and it's impossible. It's impossible to put it together. If you're capturing an outside space with a drone, you have to know the regulations. The difficulty in our case is that the street is near the government buildings quarter there, so we cannot really fly. So we can fly in parts of the street freely. Street, we have to be really difficult because we had a couple of occasions when the drone would just lose it, like the pilot would just lose control of the drone. It was experienced, everything was great, but the drone just went somewhere and it would not listen to the controls. So tree is great if the object that you're capturing has a unique texture. You know, a kind of a fast thing to imagine is sort of a rusty see old stuff. You can think of sort of, if you think of a computer game Half-Life 2, there would be easy to do in photogrammetry, like old barrels or old pieces of furniture that have a unique texture. Texture is even, like new buildings, new walls and stuff like that. Photogrammetry would go crazy because the software would not have points of connection. Put the stuff together. There are solutions to that. Obviously, you can put unique marks on the walls, or still, it requires sort of extra effort. Another thing that photogrammetry is bad at is reflective surfaces. As you move around the object, or you move next to a glass wall, you have a different, every time you have a different image, the software goes crazy and it sort of doesn't work. Another thing, and that we've probably put together thread objects already, at least in photogrammetry on this street. So you have to be really difficult, and this goes a little techie, but you have to be really attentive to the 3D model that the software produces, because sometimes the 3D model would be too heavy for the software to handle. So you have to be really sort of attentive towards the photographs that you're putting into software are there, and stuff like that. Equipment. So it's something that we already have as journalists at our disposal. So we have never straight away, I'd say that we've never done, and that's maybe something that we can, as a group, we have never in our company used LiDAR, and we have never tried videogrammetry, photogrammetry the sort of the conservative way. We've used DSLRs, drones to do our models. So in terms of cameras, any full frame camera with a lens that produces sharp images. Let me try and share my screen. Share. So these are the things that you would like to avoid. Losing focus is one of them. Do you see the screen?
Yes.
1, 2, 3. So losing focus is one of them. You want the images that you put into software to be sharp. You want the things that you're scanning to be static, and sort of you have to ensure that there is no movement in the scene. As I've said, transparent and shiny objects are difficult for the software to handle. The same goes for very thin objects, crisscrossing objects. So in photogrammetry would not really work with the leaves. Trees are really difficult to do. So what we're gonna do in our project, and it involves a lot of trees and bushes, is gonna try and match most close trees in the asset store. Very plain featureless textures are difficult, and repetitive textures are difficult. Whites as well is a no-no, as well as motion blur. So for photojournalists that as myself that like open aperture, obviously a no-no. So your images have to be sharp with so aperture wise it's at least f8 or even f11. distortion as well is a no-no. So that prime lenses are the best for photogrammetry.
Which lenses? You cut out that for a second. Which lenses?
Prime lenses.
Prime lenses.
Prime lenses are great for photogrammetry because they're very sharp. So for most of the scans that I do personally, I use a 20 millimeter on a wide angle 35. 20 millimeter is quite a wide angle, but because it always captures a huge area, and the program has more points put together and understand.
Is that 20 millimeter on a full frame camera?
Yeah, that's a 20 millimeter on a full frame. Yeah. JPEG compression. So we do not put. We compress the JPEGs mostly to about 3,000, 3,500 on the long side, and that is enough. Changing light is also a no-no, because as you're capturing the scene, if the same areas have different lighting, the software would go crazy and again. Avoid dark shadows. Sometimes if you cannot avoid dark shadows, you can use a flash, or you can use an LED. That's how we worked in Chernobyl. The rooms would have big windows, and obviously from the windows there was light and a lot of shadows. So I would use an external flash, sort of make the light even. Or overexposure is another no-no. All the frames that you put into photogrammetry have to be evenly exposed. Lens flares are another no-no. So it kind of seems a little boring, but what you have to make sure is that all the photographs that you take are sort of similar to each other. One of the things that, so we also kind of teach photogrammetry to colleagues that we meet, and one of the classical mistakes is putting an automatic white balance. So if you yeah.
Just before we move on, to give credit to the website tested.com, the author of that project. I'm assuming you didn't write that. Just you were demoing from tested.com that did a thorough tutorial about photogrammetry as well. I want to give them credit. Go ahead.
Yeah. So white balance is something that you have to make sure is. So when you arrive at a scene, you have to put a custom white balance that is most according to the scene you're capturing, and then all the images are going to be and the white balance would not be jumping from one photograph to another. And then when you have all that, and I have a small example to show. Wait a sec. Show screen. So this is a. Sorry, my Mac is a little lagging. So let's see for VR. So 3.
So one would say that there's a difference in strategy and perhaps equipment when you're shooting an object, shooting an indoor room, and then shooting outdoors. And the way that I process photogrammetry is an object, a static object, something from a museum seems to be the easiest way, because it's hopefully you control the lighting and you walk around and take pictures all around the room. To capture a room, and to use an example would be after Solitary from Emblematic, to capture that prison cell, that's a different strategy as well, opposed to going outside, which to me seems the most complicated, which is what you're doing, Alexey, right? Capturing a neighborhood to that effect. So maybe we'll tackle each one slightly different. I feel like an object is a great beginner approach. And we have on the Hangout Ben Kramer, who's done drone and object stuff, and I think Room as well as Dan. Maybe you guys can chime in after Alexey settles in on some stuff. Go ahead, Alexey, showing your example.
Yeah, so this is the monument to one of the protesters that was killed on February the 20th. So treat this monument as sort of an object. And as you see, I'm slowly going around it. So I make sort of an upper circle around it, going through the whole thing. So one thing you have to make sure when doing photogrammetry is that you have every sort of part of the object captured from, captured from all the angles that would ensure that you have all the parts covered. So,
did you measure the distance when you went around there, or did you eyeball it? Is that you and the camera, or is it you and a tripod taking those series of photos?
So it's just me and the camera. It was enough light to do a closed aperture, so I think I'm at f8. I'm normally at f8, and I'm not using a tripod.
Okay.
As you see, I've finished the upper circle, and then I move lower, and then I'm doing another circle on this medium level. So as you would imagine, I would finish the circle, and I think I might have also shot some details of it. This is a difficult object to do. Why? Because it's marble stone, and it has enough unique elements on the front side here. The portrait. So I've also done a vertical circle consisting of vertical images around this part. So this marble stone had enough unique elements on the front side that it sort of allowed me to do metric scan. So all these images then go into the processing software. Most popular programs are Agisoft Photoscan and Reality Capture from Capturing Reality.
And before you go there, just to kind of put it in context, you went around 3 times, one up high, one down low, one vertical, and how many photos did that produce?
So if you see the screen now, that's the object that you see in the middle, and these blue squares are the images that I took. So as you can see, I've done 3 circles around the object.
And how much is Photoscan? That's the Photoscan software, right? How much is Photoscan?
Photoscan standard, and that is something that we are using. Costs $189, I think, per copy. There is a professional version that costs, I think, around $5,000. It has a lot of great features, but that it's hard to afford for a lot of immersive journalists.
Is there a reason why you're using Agisoft Photoscan versus Reality Capture?
So we've tried Reality Capture, and something Reality Capture is great at, I think, is speed. So it really does things faster than Photoscan. But for workflow, we are working with a drone model that we've done of the street that I can show later. We're working with a drone model for a very long period of time. Tried putting the almost 2,000 images that the drone model consists of into reality capture, a model so big that we would not even be able to sort of work with. So reality capture is great in terms of speed, but it's not great in terms of optimization, I have a feeling. You know, we've been working with Photoscan for almost a year now, and I would say do with it.
And you can use, you can download a 30-day trial of Photoscan. It's full functioning, if I remember correctly, to kind of allow you, for those on a budget who could maybe use it for quick turnaround example test before they commit to that software, that is available, I believe. And Ben, do you use reality capture?
Yeah, so I use reality capture. I used to use Photoscan, but to represent the situation, I did a project 3 years ago with about 600 images, and I had a MacBook Air with about 4 GB of RAM, and this kind of illustrates the taxing time that goes into using Photoscan. It would have taken a week to process these 600 photos. It was of a landfill in Nairobi. And I had like 2 days. I needed to get everything processed to do a talk at a computational journalism conference at Columbia about this photogrammetry for storytelling. And so what I did was I had to use Amazon AWS cloud server with like 260 gigs of RAM to process this huge image set. And that only took about 12 hours. So Photoscan, I don't use anymore because it devours RAM. Like you need a serious workstation, ideally with well over 128 gigs of RAM, because that's what it needs. Even it prioritizes RAM over graphics card, over CPU. So reality capture, on the other hand, is what I'm now using, and because it's so much faster, I can process 1,000 images on my PC with 32 gigs of RAM and a NVIDIA GTX 1070, and it takes 5 hours, right, instead of days. So yeah, reality capture. But the downside to reality capture versus Photoscan is that reality capture requires that you have an NVIDIA graphics card with the CUDA chipset. So it's limited in that respect, but if you have that machine, it is so much faster. And especially if you have, if you don't have a lot of time to do post-production, you're working in the journalism space, Photoscan can be kind of a killer in that regard.
How much is reality capture?
So, okay, you can get it, you can get a 30-day, it's on a subscription model. You can get it through Steam, and it's, I believe, $40 for a month. You can also buy it, or you can also get the subscription through the Reality Capture, or the company, Capturing Reality is the company name. You can go to Capturing Reality's website, and you can purchase a 3-month subscription for €100. The only difference between the Steam subscription and the actual Capturing Reality subscription is if you use the Steam subscription, you have to be online connected to Steam when you're using Capturing Reality. If you go through their website and purchase their 3-month subscription, you can be offline.
Alexey, so back to you. How long did it take you to process, or if there's continue more steps, if you can answer at some point, how long it took you to render that memorial and what your machine setup was?
We don't have like an extremely crazy setup, and also Ben is right. I just thought Photoscan requires a lot of RAM, but the images, let me get the screen showing again. So when you put the images inside a processing software, be it Photoscan or reality capture, it creates something called a point cloud. So that's, let me take the photographs off. So it creates a point cloud, which it sort of looks for the elements in the pictures, and it creates this sort of futuristic looking thing. And then Photoscan also has something called a dense cloud. Really looks a lot more like reality. So in Photoscan, you can turn on sort of support for the GPU, and then the first two processes, the point cloud and the dense cloud, on the graphics card than they are on the RAM. But yes, when you start creating a mesh, and then the texture is using mostly is the RAM memory. So the machines that we are using are not crazy. They have 32 gigabytes of RAM. Makes sort of putting together the models a little long, but I would not say that it's, you know, we've never had to wait longer than maybe sort of a day or a day and a half. But the day and a half drone model to be put together which consists of like 1,900 images.
So that one there, how long did it take to render the model of the memorial?
66 images on a 32 gigabytes of RAM, point cloud to dense cloud to mesh to textured mesh in less than, I would say, 2 hours, maybe less than 3 hours.
Okay, cool.
So let me show you our own model that we did. It might take some time, huge, because it's a huge model. What I like about photogrammetry is it's you know, it whenever you put images inside a processing software, it is sort of like magic. You have these still photographs that are, you know, sort of nothing, but when you put them inside a processing software, you have something worthwhile that you can put into and play with it the way you want.
What was the learning curve to understand the photogrammetry software, whether it's Photoscan or Capture Reality or Reality Capture by Capture Reality?
Do you mean, is it difficult to learn the software?
Yeah, I'm not good at reading manuals. I just poke and hit the buttons and watch a YouTube tutorial, if that. So how are you in terms of reading the manuals? Did it take you time to learn it, and was it easy to do?
It's fairly easy. So I would say the difficulties actually occur when you. So it's not difficulty by any means to put the processing software and then process it and create a textured mesh. But the difficulties occur when you start putting the mesh into the engine, be it Unity or Unreal Engine. There are a lot of pitfalls to that would a round table or 2 round tables to discuss, because there are so many things. So what processing software does, it generates a high poly mesh. What 3D models consist of? They consist of polygons, which are triangles. Create an object in photogrammetry, it has too many triangles that a 3D modeler would create from, you know, 1,000 polygons, maybe a couple thousand. In photogrammetry, it would be hundreds of thousands or even millions, because, you know, it's so detailed that it kind of, you know, every curve that is there, there are too many polygons on it, and it's not optimized. So you have to kind of and this is more into game development, but really the challenge is how do you optimize the model that you create with photogrammetry. So let me jump back.
We started this conversation, or the idea of having this roundtable came from the Unity ebook that talks about photogrammetry workflow, which talking to you, Alexey, and talking to other people who do photogrammetry is pretty intense. Curious to know your reaction to the photogrammetry workflow ebook from Unity. But before we do that, I know that Dan has also done photogrammetry and videogrammetry. Dan, as that model is loading, do you want to share any of your experience and thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Robert. We also used, you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah, we also used the same workflow. So we also used Photoscan and Unity. As I was saying, though, and we sort of had talked about this a little bit, with LiDAR, you can just keep stuff as point clouds. It really sort of depends what the final export is going to be. Because in Unity, it's quite simple to drop a player controller into a scene and then walk around on a mesh. It's a little more complicated, obviously, if you just have a point cloud, because there's no real collider for a player to walk on. But you can just use that beautiful point cloud that Alexey just showed. If you want to give people sort of like the omniscient god sort of flying through a scene kind of thing. So as you can probably see, there's like a million different ways to skin a cat when it comes to doing this sort of thing. But one thing to remember as well is that meshes tend to be quite heavy, and Alexey touched on it, but the idea of optimization is a huge hurdle. How many polygons and faces particular objects have, and I think the problem is that Unity maybe necessarily wasn't designed for this originally, and so there's a lot of like workarounds that you have to sort of you find yourself doing, and there are some out-of-the-box solutions as well. So we used, for example, the Matterport camera, which I think I can see Nathan here. So it's a custom. It's literally a proprietary camera that sits on a tripod and rotates and spits out a mesh, even though it's really not. That's not what it was really designed for. It's really meant as a sort of DIY Google Street View kind of setup with photos that you sort of float through from one to the next. And so we've used that mesh, but then it requires quite a lot of mesh optimization. And so we use like Mesh Mixer, for example, to then like hack corners out and to try and sort of like, piece over the holes that it leaves and things like that. But we've had very similar issues because we obviously do photogrammetry as well, to what Alexey mentioned, particularly is when you effectively have to find, with the Matterport camera especially, you have to eyeball what the capture radius is of the site, and then ensure that no one walks through that radius in the 30 seconds that it takes to spin around. And you just wouldn't believe the number of people that even just walk straight up to it, like as it's turning and
we
blinking.
did that with 360 cameras.
But
cameras, people ruin the shot. So
exactly. So yeah, it's kind of amazing. But these are all. I mean, I think it's because all the hardware and the platform was invented, and then people started using it in different ways. So that's kind of the challenge. But
so I'm going to represent me and the rest of the community to try to decode what you've said as well. Like there's the mesh and the point cloud. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Basically, photogrammetry creates such a high res that you need to optimize it. And we're not at the point yet where in Photoshop, where I was saving photos for web design, there's no save for web option just yet. There's no automatic check a box optimized for non-gaming, not extremely high res kind of polygons. Not yet, so you have to manually do that. And that is a craft, perhaps a craft like stitching that will go away, or am I being too naive and hopeful on that?
Is that for me or Alexey?
For those who've done photogrammetry, whomever.
Well, I mean, I would just say very quickly, Unity does have some stuff like It's called LOD in the game design sort of community, I guess. So level of detail, and effectively what that means is you can stick in a model, one that's really basic and looks like, you know, you've stuck it in an oven and it's sort of melted, one that's like a little better, and then one that's fully beautiful. And you can tell it to only when a player controller gets close to it to show the beautiful one, and for the rest of it, so that the computer doesn't have to constantly be thinking about it. But then you obviously need to bake those 3 different versions and put them in. So, you know, other ways around it include, because it's the drain on the processor really comes down to the real-time rendering. So like the computer thinking, Christ, where is that model and where's the person moving to, and etc. So again, you can you can export rendered video within Unity. And so then obviously, you know, it's a lot simpler, but then you lose the agency of virtual reality. So it's like a swings and balances kind of thing.
And Alexey, one more time for folks, defining a mesh and a point cloud, because I've also seen in what are the file extensions? What are it's a OBJ file and the other files, and I know that one, I've seen 3D models of something, but I forgot to include the skin on top of it. What are those terms? What are those files called?
So point cloud is the first stage. Again, be it photoscan or capturing reality. It's basically the software analyzing the images and putting together that it kind of sees in the images that are the same. And then point cloud is really like a cloud of points in the air. And then in photoscan, possibility to do a dense cloud. It's a little bit confusing. So dense cloud is this. It's basically a point cloud. It's just a little more dense, and it looks like reality a little bit more. Over these clouds, over these points, creates puts polygons on top of it, and sort of recreates objects using polygons, and then on top of the mesh. So object recreated with polygons is a mesh. There is also a texture, and the texture can be it can be a 4K, it can be an 8K, be of different sizes. So I'm doing something that Ben Kramer mentioned. I'm trying to show a huge mesh on a MacBook Pro. See, it's a little difficult, but here it is. So that we did. It's not the latest version. I think it's one version or maybe 2 versions back. Not necessarily the ones we're working with. But this is a drone model, a photogrammetry of a huge, you're recognizing Independence Square and Hotel
Yeah, that's
Ukraine.
amazing. Wow.
Yes. So we flew drone all over a big chunk of downtown Kiev and recreated it using photogrammetry. So
am I seeing it correctly? It took 1,757 cameras and over 2 million points. So is that photos?
So 1,757 cameras is the amount of images that are put inside this, and the amount of polygons is here. It's 4,200,000 polygons, which is in 2 words, nothing for such a huge scene. It's really so the sharp edges. If you go really closer into it, the sharp edges are not really sharp, and there are parts here and there they're slowly filling. And this is sort of the skeleton for the project that we're filling with better models that we captured using DSLR cameras, and also things that we created using CGI. For instance, there is a bridge that consists from a lot of railings, and it's really sort of a custom shape. We recreated using CGI from reference photographs because it was difficult to do geometry of it. I'm really careful about rotating this thing because I think if I start rotating things, my machine is just gonna blow to bits. So,
well, I'm sure we have questions. Carol, do you have a question in chat?
Yes. I wanted to ask how high was the drone flying when you were capturing this?
And what is the process? Do you have a flight plan that you pre-program, or are you winging it?
Carol, can you say that again because you disappeared for a sec?
Yeah, how high was the drone flying when you were capturing this?
So different. So one way to do drone photogrammetry is just use DJI Ground Station Pro. Automatic, you sort of select an area and then drone flies and it does the images that are parallel to the ground. What the problem with images that are parallel to the ground is that you don't have the vertical, you don't have this vertical sides. Buildings, we flew the drone next to the buildings and did the famous snake, the photogrammetry snake. So we would, I don't think I've covered enough how photogrammetry is done technically. I would like to share, after the conversation, I would like to share some of the resources I've already shown during the conversation, but the resources on how to technically sort of do this movement. So we flew next to the buildings and did the snake. With some areas, we flew lower, flew higher. We had to fly lower, closer to the government buildings, because if we flew higher, the drones would just disappear and fly away.
Ben, you've flown drones for photogrammetry. Do you have any tips or things to keep in mind?
I have a question to Alex.
I don't know if Ben could hear me or not on that one. Oh, we can't hear you. Yeah, we still can't hear you. At least I can't. Danny has a question. Danny?
Yeah. How do you stitch the snake capture buildings with the general taking of overall the map? You know, like how do you in your 3D stitch the time that you took over the building over the overall of the map? Understand?
Yeah, I imagine it's like you're doing patches of 3D models that you have to put together and blend together as a puzzle. Is that an appropriate analogy for it? How do you connect everything? How do you put it together?
So to make sure that everything stitches together, we flew the images that you see in there. Were taken in August, in October, in November, and in December. Are very different months with different trees and stuff. So we were selecting very cloudy, grim days to do it, so the images would match in the end. We did some ground station pro flying, especially at the beginning when we were sort of starting. So Ground Station Pro that are parallel to the ground are sort of the foundation, and then we flew next to the buildings and did the snake. We have the vertical sides, like the hotel that you see in there, like the high building, 16 stories high. So in the Ground Station Pro model, there was just sort of nothing there. It was blown to bits, because this parallel capturing that Ground Station Pro gives you a possibility to do, it's used for 2D maps and is not great for 3D maps. So we flew next to the buildings to ensure that we have all the sides.
Did you, to kind of go back to Carol's question, if the building's 16 floors high, did you fly the drone consistently 16 floors high, or did you fly then go down and fly like that? The latter?
Yeah. If this is the building, we flew a drone like this, going closer to the bottom. We started from the top, parallel to one of the walls, and then another wall and another wall.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now, Ben.
Yes. Okay.
We see ourselves in there, but we
Yeah.
can hear you.
Okay. This should pull up. Okay. Okay. Do you see a plaza?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
So this is a smaller scale drone reconstruction from a semi-urban area, but this is in Puerto Rico. So this was also with about 1,700 images, and the focus really was on the core of the plaza here. So these questions about how high were you flying? You know, what was what was the camera setup? It was a DJI Phantom 4. We were flying it at about 70 feet above the ground. So the ground being the center of the plaza here where we took off. So in reality, over some of these taller buildings, we were probably about within about 30 feet. And I've locked up. I've jammed my computer, I think. You guys still hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, there we go. Yeah. So this is a first sort of a first attempt on the reconstruction. As you can see over here, there's some. It's off kilter. Anyway.
Have you cleaned that up, or is that like you?
No, this is raw. Like this is. I'm just gonna dump the images in and see what we get.
So
So
you didn't
this
get
was
any ghosting of people moving, or does it
so,
crop it out?
Well, it's not that it crops it out. It's that when people move, so if you have a series of shots and if people are moving throughout the course of your imaging, they just disappear because the software doesn't find them, you know, from photo to photo because they've moved. So it's the software, regardless of what you use, it expects a particular object to be in the same location, and it expects to see different perspectives of that object. So like with a car, you know, if that car is parked and you have multiple photos with that car, and in each photo the perspective has shifted, it will reconstruct the car. Now, if the car were to drive off halfway through, you know, if the car only appears in 5 of your images, it's either going to be a blur or it just won't be there at all because there's not enough data from the images to reconstruct it.
Okay.
So, but for the drone, I was working with students from the University of Nebraska. We were in Puerto Rico for 3 weeks. This is in the island of Vieques. And we used Pix 4D capture to pilot the drone to set up the automated flight path. So basically, we had it fly transects, which is just the grid pattern over the plaza here, and we went a little bit over the buildings around the plaza, but the photos were taken from angles of, what was it? I think we did about 65 degrees. So not a 45-degree angle, but a little bit more vertical than that. And we also did photos on the ground, like Alexey has been doing. So in the end, we'll be merging the ground, the terrestrial, as they're often referred to. We'll be merging terrestrial with aerial photos for a reconstruction of this plaza here.
Ben Dan in the chat asked Ben, how big was the exported OBJ of that file, and did it play well with Unity?
Yeah, so I can tell you right now that it was, let's see. It was only, so the OBJ is about 700 megabytes. The texture was 350 megabytes. Now, I have not put it into Unity yet, so I can't tell you how well it will play in Unity. But that's like, I didn't even simplify. I've done zero optimization for that model because it's still in progress. I'm just seeing how things have come together. And it was, to answer Daniel's question, it was processed in reality capture.
It does look amazing, though.
How many polygons is that?
I don't recall offhand. Let me see if.
So as you load that up to kind of, again, break it down, if I were to get that and put it into Unity and put that on my canvas and somehow export it out to put it onto my HMD, and I stand on it, and you've added some collider physics thing that I as a user can stand on it, will it look photorealistic, or because it's a drone, it almost looks like a dreamscape, or does it depend?
Something, it'll be something in between. It's not going to look, like you're literally there, but it's going to be strikingly familiar, strikingly similar for those of you who haven't been there.
And Alexey, for your goal for answering that question, but also kind of applying it to your project, is your output for me to walk that street?
Yeah. So I would say that we treat the drone model as a foundation. Gives us the knowledge where the objects are, but then we sort of have a custom approach. So some of the objects, as I've already said, we'll do CGI of, as some of the objects we'll do photogrammetry of, but drone model. So it's really something in between a dream landscape model. So drone photogrammetry looks great, but I would probably say that in most cases it's not realistic enough for VR.
So it probably, like, I've done videogrammetry using decode, which Dan has used as well, and it's not perfect. There's some stuff there. It's not ready to scale just yet, but there's a lot of potential there. Although decode is dependent on Microsoft Connect, and that has been discontinued. So you can buy them cheap on Amazon before they run out. I'm trying to think of my first project, what it should be, and maybe it should be my messy office, making sure that none of the objects move. And I guess I use a DSLR with a 22 millimeter on a fixed frame camera, and I snake one wall at a time, run it through Photoscan or a reality capture, and do all those things together, different heights for the room, right? Probably in between, underneath the desk, in between the chair and the desk or what have you. And then poof, it gives me that magic.
Let me just say that
Rain on my brain, burst my bubble.
I'm looking at your room, and everything that I see is so hard. Like this is
too white and bland textures
and reflective.
Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah.
Okay, so pick a dungeon, like a prison cell.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
But it's worth saying that anything with glass, for example, is going to be a nightmare.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we used a structured sensor. I scanned my students in because I want to use those 3D models instead of their photos on their website. And like these glasses kind of paint onto my face, I noticed. So, the depth isn't there just yet. And I believe Matterport has that similar thing too. It kind of like paints it all out.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and so that's a good point about, well, obviously once you've got the environment, it's just the stage, so to speak, right? So any object that you want to interact with has to be processed separately and imported into Unity as a separate object. So I think Nathan had way back sent me a mesh that they did of people sitting in a tent in a refugee camp, and yeah, they're sort of like plastered onto the scene, so there's no way that you can sort of interact with them, pick them up, or like write any sort of code that would mean when you get X close to such and such, then they would change in any way. So that's why it's good to, for example, Alexey's scan of the grave being separate, like if you put that then on top of his environment, then you could do something to it, like make it bigger when you got close to it or something like that.
I remember a conversation we were having during ONA 17 last year, which was about could you use 360 camera to do photogrammetry, and you couldn't because it distorts the camera. But did anyone see the gyroptic news of their kind of camera that takes 360 pictures, kind of like Matterport, and starts to stitch it together? Does that hold any promise of more accessible magic for anyone?
I've seen, not with the gyroptic, but with other cameras like LG Commission, and someone did a whole park with 360 imagery, and they did photogrammetry. I don't know how.
Yeah, I've seen that too. Actually, there was some researchers that created. It's not that they built a tool using three. They took 360 video, and yeah, I think it was the same thing. It was a park, and they did another setup. And I can try and dig up the link and send it over if I can find it again. But it was phenomenal. Like the quality was incredible. And they built it just carrying a. I think they had it on a. If I remember correctly, they just were walking through the park with a camera on a monopod.
And they didn't show up in it? Well, actually, in the gyroptic one, they say that you are removed from the model. So as you walk through it, you remove you from the model. I don't know if everyone saw Eric Chen's from Facebook's photogrammetry experiment with the Insta361 bullet time. He threw it around his head and was able to take each frame out and then process it as photogrammetry. Didn't look pretty, but you start to see a dreamscape representation of it. Are there any last minute questions? We're I think past an hour, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. This was really fantastic. Any last questions, parting thoughts?
The one thing I will say in terms of 360, we found obviously it's great to have the stage, but you have no sky, right? Because it's way too far away or whatever.
So you need that skybox.
You'll still exactly need to do a skybox or a spherical capture and then stick that in. But then if you're doing just a room or a smaller space, it gets super weird to try and match up the relative size of the sphere with where the objects sit, the 3D objects sit within it, you know? So that's what we're trying to do without it looking super funky. So,
weird.
Yeah.
Other questions?
One thing I'll add on the camera note, because I think it's everybody's, there's always a lot of question about what camera do you use, what lens. I don't use a DSLR. I'm using a Lumix Micro Four Thirds, the G7, and I've had really great success with it. I've been using it for a couple of years, and part of the reason why I like it is because it's lightweight and it's portable. It's got a flip out little LCD. Like we had a Canon 1D with us, 2 Canon 1Ds in Puerto Rico, and the students and I were using that and my Lumix, and it was just so much easier to use the Lumix, and the results are, you can't really tell the difference between the two. So I like the Micro Four Thirds cameras. I just wanted to get that out there, the Lumix cameras, and I'm using it with a 20 millimeter and a 14, which translates to, if we're talking like the full frame DSLR equivalent, that would be a 40 millimeter and a 28 millimeter based on the differences in sensor sizes. But also, I'll point out there's a good project there are 2 projects that I've found useful to look at, how they did it. And there are 2 castle projects. Pix4D did a castle reconstruction, and they talk about the hardware that they're using. And I thought it was really insightful because they did this about 2 or 3 years ago, and they were using GoPros, and then they were also using DSLRs, but they were using 8 millimeter lenses with so there's a lot of distortion there. So they were using 8 millimeter lenses for the interiors, and that work is notable because this software that we're using, it has, like reality capture, Pix4D, they have lens profiles. So if you're using a GoPro, if you're using an 8 millimeter lens on your DSLR and there is distortion, the software can understand that and it can work with it, and it doesn't result in a flawed product. So really, point being, journalists, use the camera that you have. You don't need to go out and buy a special camera with special lenses to do this. Although when you are doing interior work, like in your office, it's easier when you have a wide field of view lens, but you can still use those images.
Danny in the chat mentions Cupix, CUPIX.com, as kind of like using 360 images to create your own walkthrough street view. And right now, I chatted with them, and it was currently free, if I remember. Matt, you also asked a question in the chat. Do you want to ask it? You have to unmute. Oh, I think you clicked on the wrong button, but Matt was asking what other ways to distribute these room scale, these photogrammetry products outside of building an app in Unity. Matt, I just asked your question, so welcome back. What are the ways to distribute outside of Unity, creating an app in Unity?
Sketchfab.
Sketchfab.
Yeah.
In fact, that's what 3 years ago when I got into photogrammetry, that's what I was saying. Like, this is how you should do it. I mean, that was before the VR boom. So Sketchfab, they've been around now for 5 years. And this project that I showed a moment ago from Puerto Rico, that's destined probably for Sketchfab first, and then maybe later on as a headset VR piece.
Now, if you guys remember Oculus Connect 4, Facebook announced the ability to distribute 3D models in Facebook through the timeline, offering two opportunities. One, just like Sketchfab, so who knows if it will dethrone Sketchfab, but two, if you create a 3D object, you can therefore bring that 3D object into like an AR experience. So that dancing hot dog from Snapchat, you make your version of it and put it into Facebook. Part of the demo at Oculus Connect 4 was that then people can do selfies with this AR experience. So that's
is that live and open to everyone yet to be able to upload a 3D?
I don't remember, but Ben, if you could take one for the team and upload something into Facebook and see if it takes it, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Other questions?
One other question about the Matterport ecosystem versus kind of like using DSLR. For those of you with experience with Matterport, from my understanding, from a workflow standpoint, it's kind of an all-in-one ecosystem that they kind of advertise. So with your experience using Matterport versus a DSLR, which one is an easier application to adopt?
That's a great question. I looked into it, and that's why I didn't choose to go with Matterport, because I had to pay them to host the 3D model. I believe Ben used it. Has anyone else used Matterport on here?
Yeah, I've used it quite a bit as
So answering Socrates' question.
I mean, the Matterport is much more point and shoot, in the sense that you kind of set it up, you push a button, you hide around a corner, it does its thing. You send it off to the cloud and it stitches everything for you. You do host it on their site, although you can download the OBJ. I think the biggest problem, two big problems from it are, once it starts that scan doing its little rotation, you know, if someone walks through your scene, you're screwed, and you got to do it again and again for every time someone comes through. The photo quality on them is pretty poor, I would say. I'd say it's frankly speaking, like relatively bad. And the meshes that come out are a fucking disaster. Excuse me, they're a disaster. It's I mean, you drop those into Blender or something and start looking around, and it's a mess. So if you wanted to do any kind of serious optimization on them, you're gonna spend a lot of time on that. But again, it's that trade-off, really. It's like, you want to run a simple app on an iPad and just drop a camera in and run out, and you get a model that you can use for some purposes. It might be worth it, but you're limited in what you can do with it, and the quality is not is certainly on the lower end, I'd say. The
use case I've seen it is for real estate and browser-based, desktop-based, that you're clicking around and street viewing through.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what it was. It was built for real estate to begin with.
Yeah.
And we did a few projects where it was exactly like an internal street view, which was fine. They added some annotations so you can annotate stuff. In those use cases, for those use cases where it's strictly for a browser-based web experience, I think it's fine. I wouldn't recommend it for work or bring it into Unity or any other kind of 3D modeling application.
Perfect. Any other last questions? Going once? We've lost a couple people. Thank you so much for your time, Alexey, and sharing your knowledge, as well as Ben and Dan and others, and Nathan for chiming in and helping this community grow with this new skill set. We'll please share your attempts of photogrammetry in the 3D models with Sketchfab, and let's experiment together. Thank you, Alexey. A round of applause for Alexey. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck with the project. We look forward to it.
Thank you very much. Well, it was great. Are we still live or?
Let me just sign off right now. 3, 2, 1. Bye.